In undergrad, that was the very first time that I did Blackboard. Just and then all the we one more Do I just take them down?
How many pages?
4 or 5. You can write on both sides.
So 10.
Here you go. High school. 30 years old. I changed the batteries. There you go. There's that. Thank you. Do you read Walmart's fourth quarter earnings? We
I don't have Walmart stocks.
we need advice.
That makes sense because of their cloud services. Okay, on the first page of the exam, please write down your name and your student ID. Your name is important.
Wait a minute, how do we know where our student ID is?
Sorry?
Like our email address?
Well, don't worry, the ID is not that important. We have only 2 sections, but the name is. And please use your formal name that is included in Blackboard so that I can match your grade with the grade book. And you are good to go. The exam should not take you more than 50 minutes. If you are writing more than 2 paragraphs for a question, you are writing too much. So 2 questions are entirely graph. Please read the question very carefully. Do not write anything extra because you will not get any extra grade. Of course.
Write the answer on this page or on this page? Or both?
You will write your answers on the papers, white papers that I provided. Please order them. and make sure you write down your name on those papers as well. And at the end, after you are done, you will come forward and you are going to staple that exam. Okay? I will leave this room at around 8:50 or 8:55. extra time. You have to be done by now. Probably not just in time. Probably just went overtime. Where is everyone else? We need to start.
They answered on the board the whole time. No, we'll save that for later.
Not necessarily, as long as it's stapling properly is fine. As long as you have your name on the front. Okay, let us begin. We will surely run out of time today because we have some really important chapters to cover. One of the students, one of you actually requested me to talk a little bit about question number 1 in exam number 1. I have provided you with a answer key where I talked about these 3 different possibilities that can happen. I have received a wide variety of different kinds of answers on question number 1. Let's start with the overall performance of the class in exam 1. It was pretty good. There are at least 4 students that I know who got 100 out of 100, which is pretty, I think, impressive considering the level of challenge that this exam posed. I haven't done any kind of averaging of the overall grade, but I'm pretty sure the average is somewhere in the 80s. Different people approach question number 1 in different ways. And this was I think from the student perspective, this was a good learning experience. Is to look at a real life situation and how you can translate that into a graphical setup or explain that by using economic methodology. When you look at the problem is related to a market where there is clearly changes on the demand side and changes on the supply side. The changes on the demand side is obvious that demand has increased. A lot of people had arguments about how the incidents that are mentioned in the problem is affecting the supply side. And that was kind of strange to me because the question starts with the notion that there is a strike, right? What does that mean is that it means that probably there are not that many cab drivers available during that strike. So a lot of people looked at it in different ways. Most of you agreed that supply will go down, and I think that's true. So at the beginning of the problem, supply would go down and demand would go up. So supply curve will take a leftward shift and demand curve will take a rightward shift. The question then talks about a series of events that happen later on. And many people try to look at the sequence of events as they are. They are like a sequence of events. So they try to look at how each of the incidents mentioned in the question is affecting the market demand and supply curve. And I thought that was unnecessary. because the question asks you what is going to happen to the market equilibrium, price and quantity. It did not ask for any sequential description of events, right? So it is true that a lot of things are happening after the strike, and obviously there are going to be changes on the subsequent changes on the demand side and the supply side, but that's where economics is so useful. Because we do not need to really quantify by how much demand and supply is changing. All we need to know is that there are going to be changes on the positive changes on the demand side and negative changes on the supply side, and the magnitude could vary. It could happen that after a while demand could shift back again, supply could shift back, so the magnitude is really not important. That's why we can broadly explain the problem by just considering 3 different situations. And the considerations are based on the magnitude of the changes. If demand changes more than supply, which is case 1, we will have one kind of scenario. If demand changes less than supply, we will have one kind of scenario, and then you have case number 3 where the magnitude is the same. In the answer key, I did not mention a 4th option, but the explanation that I provided to you in your exam, I talked about a 4th option, a 4th case. The reason why I did not provide that as part of the answer key, because I don't think that is actually true, but let me draw that anyway. So let's look at the question. The 4th possibility that can happen basically centers around the fact that Uber is somehow sending a signal that after a while the price will go down at their normal level. What does normal level means? It means that prices will go down at their pre-change level. So the original equilibrium price will somehow be restored back. Well, that's just an information. Uber is not the largest player in the New York airport. And that is a very important issue. So this is one of the suppliers of taxi services, and they are not the dominant player. If Uber was a dominant player in this market, the last information could be useful, but I don't think it is useful. But nevertheless, assuming for the time being that we are looking at a theoretical situation, how do you think? So, can I draw here? I don't think I can.
Before you do leave that point, can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah, definitely.
Because if you look at, so it's a real world question. So I think sequence of events are important because Uber has something that taxi cabs don't. I mean, for anybody who's driven for Uber knows that if something happens like the strike, Uber sends out an alert to their drivers. And a lot of times their drivers have their phones off because there's enough taxi cabs there where it's not worth their time. Given the fact that Uber can alert their drivers and the driver can then make a decision to put themselves into the supply chain, then Uber then at that point during a strike could become a major component of the market. And it'd be a function of whether or not people can get there.
Actually, and that's exactly what I'm going to draw now. That's exactly what I'm going to draw now. So it's a 4th possibility where we can think about Uber playing a major role not for the entire market but exactly during that time of crisis. It could be a possibility. And I did not penalize anyone who did not bring that idea, that a 4th possibility is a possibility. So let's look at what you just say in a graphical setup. So imagine that the market is operating as it is. So you have an original equilibrium price P star and Q star, and you have a demand curve and you have a supply curve. Because of the initial strike, the supply goes down from S to S1, and demand obviously has gone up By the way, in this particular problem, the dimension, the magnitudes are not important. I'll explain why. So imagine that as a result of this simultaneous shift of the demand and the supply curve, the price, I've just changed my mind. Well, it's not important because although at the equilibrium, at the new equilibrium, price is going down and quantity is somehow going up because the increase in demand is larger than supply. What is important here is to understand how can Uber play a role in stabilizing the market price. That's what you were talking about at this point. So if prices were to stabilize, we know that the prices have to go down to their pre-strike level. That's the P star, right? The only way that can happen is that not only Uber drivers absorb the shortage in the market, they actually supply more, like I told. And that's your story, right? So at the end, you can think of a fourth option where after the initial decline in supply, there is a massive increase in supply. And it rises so much that equilibrium quantity surely goes up, but the prices come back to their pre-crisis level. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
That's what I put in my answer.
I'll take a look
That's
at
my
it.
question. That's what was my answer. And I got
I am a human being. It is everyone needs to make mistakes, and so do I. I have graded 80 exams. It was a very difficult task, and based on the amount of comments that I have provided to your exam, you should realize that I have analyzed your exams very, very carefully, and sometimes I can make mistakes. So if you are one of those students who think that this is the kind of answers you provided and you did not get sufficient points for that, just let me know. I'll adjust your grade.
In the scenario, if you look at the articles and stuff that are online about what was going on, it happened over a very short period of time. I mean, the strike was like an hour, right? The taxi strike was like an hour. So even though Uber's price kind of fluctuated, and they said, all right, we're going to bring it back down just so we don't get a bad name of taking advantage of a unionized strike. What if that were to occur, the strike were to go on for weeks or days, and you have these people who usually depend on the dominant taxi service, and they have to find an alternative. So not all Uber drivers are going to be striking, but if you're unionized, you have to strike. Your union is striking. So you're effectively lowering the amount of available taxi services, but the demand is still high. And so now all the Uber drivers, do they have a price control where they can set whatever they want to since there is no cap?
Well, I don't think they can, at least based on what we understand about the taxi services, the market is still quite competitive. So there might not be any kind of market power there. But I want to address your question from a more holistic perspective. You started your answer by talking about if, right? Which means that your economic analysis is based on certain assumptions that you have made. And then you have answered your questions. I'm not sure how many economics courses you guys are going to be taking as part of your EMBA course. That's a very, very risky way of looking at economics. One thing that I always tell my students is that when you are trying to address questions or answer questions in an exam, never make additional assumptions. You should try to analyze the market or the economic problem based on what you are provided, rather than add assumptions to it. And I have seen a lot of variations of the answer in the exam, and I thought that was encouraging because this was a take-home exam. I think that helped the students in the sense that they were, thinking about different scenarios based on their own set of, assumptions. And and that could be problematic. You guys will take another, in-class exams, and in that exam, not making assumptions should be your strategy. Because what it does, when you start making your own assumptions, it complicates the already complicated problem that is given to you. But I completely understand where you're coming from. The question did not talk about the relative power of the particular company and the relative duration of the crisis, all of which are really important issues. You're very much right that how short or how long the strike was obviously was a very important issue, because if the strike occurred for a long period of time, that probably had more dramatic effect on the market. But the question did not mention about it gave you some time frame, but it did not focus you on the timing issues. It just made a very general question about, based on these events, how do you think the market equilibrium will change? I'm running out of time. Today is a very important class. The next set of chapters are extremely complicated. I will address other questions related to exam number 1 in my emails to you, which might take a little bit of time. At this point of time, I am collecting comments from you, and I will probably be answering your comments this week. The exam that you just submitted will take me about 3 weeks, and please be aware of that. It will take me 3 weeks to submit, grade your exams, and this time I will not send you these exams. Because in order to do that, I need to scan 80 exams, which is a Herculean task, and I will make mistakes. I do not want to do that. What will happen is that next time when we meet, I will hand over these exams. You can take a look at the exam. By that time, you will have the answer key posted in Blackboard. You can compare your answers with the answer key given, and then we can talk. How does that sound? Before I start today's class, I would like to take a little bit of time addressing one issue that has been coming over and over again. From your feedback, I have received, sort of like impressions that you think that part of the course is not well designed. There are 2 criticisms that has been provided that is making that argument. One is that I upload materials on a continuous basis, sometimes in real time. And the second one is that there is a little bit of confusion about this so-called launchpad thing. So I'm going to start with the launchpad issue. Whatever I say in the class should always be the final word on a certain issue. And the first class, I mentioned that your launchpad problems are non-graded. You're not going to get any points for that. And I have received at least 25 emails related to that. So let me make a final assessment on this. From today, I will not upload any launchpad material. If you work on launchpad or work on textbook related problems, they are non-graded. You're not going to get any extra credit for that. If you look at the version of the syllabus that I talked in the class clearly showed that you have extra credit already embedded into your class, your article discussions that you guys are doing. So as long as you do those, you are not only going to get points for the discussion, you are also going to get bonus points, which automatically adjust for the points that were previously allocated for Launchpad. Am I clear on this? I want to make sure that if you have any question about Launchpad, you ask me right now.
I think I'm clear. Where I wasn't clear is that the initial syllabus that was loaded did show that learning curve was extra credit.
That syllabus was,
that's where a lot of the confusion I think
right.
came from.
That syllabus was uploaded before this semester started. I will talk about that in a minute. But the version of the syllabus that I showed in the class clearly showed that your Launchpad point allocation is 0. Why? Because I shifted that to the class in article discussion. I think that was to benefit you. Well, I do not have any objective of penalizing you for the valuable time that you're investing in this course and investing in this grade. So that's why I wanted to shift your resources towards just 2 things. The exams and the article discussion, so that you can get the maximum out of this course. The second point is about why new materials are being uploaded, in Blackboard? The answer to that question should be very simple. To help you. This course was developed within a period of 2 semesters, 2 sequential semesters for which I got additional time. I worked with the people who taught this course before. The course was completely developed before this semester started. If and I can completely go on with the structure of the course that was developed, before the semester started, but I think that is a disservice to you. Why? Because every time I am uploading new materials, I am doing that because I am getting feedback from students that they have certain problems in a certain topic or in a certain areas. And the reason why I am uploading those materials is not to increase your reading materials. It is to help you. And I think that there is still a misunderstanding of that idea. So let me make it very clear. If you do not want to watch these additional videos that I am uploading in different points of time, do not do it. If you think that you already have a good understanding about the material based on what is already uploaded at the beginning of the week, and that's more than fine. I mean, different people learn in a different way. Some people prefer to read the textbook, some people prefer to listen to a video. And in this class, I need to be able to address everyone's needs. So that's issue number 1. Issue number 2 is that if you look at the structure of the course, there is no weekly homework. There are articles that basically asks you to talk about issues that are core elements of the chapters that we already have covered before the articles were uploaded. The objective of these videos, which takes me hours and hours to prepare for. It is not easy for me to upload videos and record videos, right? For a 1-hour video lecture, I have to spend at least 10 hours of my time to prepare and record that video. It's not a trivial process. I also teach a lot of courses. Just like you, I am also quite busy. But the reason why I am doing that, and I will continue to do that, is not to penalize you, but to help you. Because I want to make this a good learning experience for you. And sometimes when you hear a video lecture that is trying to highlight some of the ideas in a certain chapter, I think it should be helpful. If I was taking this course, I would appreciate these videos. So again, the same argument goes back. If you think that you do not need to invest 1 hour of your time in listening to a video, then don't do it. If you think, when I have taken courses like this, the only thing that was available to me was a textbook, and that was perfect with me. I didn't have any trouble. But again, different people learn in a different way, and I think over time, as technology is becoming more accessible, we should utilize all those technologies. What else?
May I
Yes.
make a comment? It would probably be helpful to us if you gave us a heads up when the video is being uploaded. Because there are times that it
I understand that.
comes as a surprise, and nobody likes a surprise.
Okay. So starting from, I think 2 weeks, I have stopped uploading videos in the middle of the week. All the videos are uploaded at the beginning of the semester, beginning of the week. And remember, the 2 part of this course is that you have these articles, and then you have to prepare for exams. When you prepare for the exams, what do? You go back to the previous weeks. If this is not how you are preparing for the exam, then there is something wrong with the preparation, right? What we do, we go back to the 4 weeks of materials that were covered before. You start preparing for each of the week, and then you take an exam. So when you are going back to a previous week and you see an additional video, you should be delighted. I will try to make a case for uploading an email saying that I have uploaded a new video, and I can guarantee you that I will face criticism based on that too. So, but when you are going back to a certain previous week's material because you are about to prepare for an exam, having an additional video should be helpful in your preparation.
It is if you're able to budget the time for it. And I think that's where we ran into some issues,
Right.
is that
So that is-
we have 3 hours that we expect to look at 3 hours worth of videos, then we pop up another one. And it's not so much that it's not a value, it's just all of a sudden surprise of having to adjust to take advantage of what you've done. Because I don't think anybody thinks you're not a hardworking professor. You're very hardworking.
Okay, thank you very much. That means a lot to me. You have. I am teaching this course for the first time. That doesn't mean that that whatever I am teaching is new to me. And obviously there is a learning curve. And these videos that are being uploaded are based on your feedback. It's not that suddenly I woke up at 12 a.m. in the morning and realized that I need to record something, right? I am getting feedback from students who are saying that I don't understand this. And the only way I can know these is towards the middle or the end of a week.
Right, but if you realize that, I think that what most of us are saying is that we want to know, to take advantage of the work that you're doing. Because, like I said, the budgeting of time is a major issue in people taking this class. And to all of a sudden say, okay, I need another hour or two of your time that's not expected or no heads up for it, is what creates that monster.
I think, let me go back to the original point, now with a little bit of quietness, is that these videos are designed to help students who are having trouble understanding the material. It is not designed for everyone in the class. So the reason why a certain video is uploaded is because certain students have said that I need help in this topic.
And I think the insight is helpful to us to know.
Well, it could be, but again, if you are having a time allocation issue, which I think is very important to you, because all of you are working full time. So if you think that you are not going to be able to allocate extra time for a video, that's fine. If you have already understood the material.
And I think that
makes sense.
And I think that the insight of what you're thinking is helping us realize the resource that you're putting up there.
And what you're saying is if you don't have time, use it as a resource maybe when you're looking back.
Right, and that's why I agree with that.
But his argument is also quite valid, right? Because as a student, you probably would like to understand what I am thinking, right? But what I'm thinking is already explained in the class. Class lectures are the starting point of any topic, and these video lectures are also uploaded in Blackboard. So the only thing that you need, basically, if you think about the core element of this course, is just the class lecture videos and your textbook. And if you combine these two ideas, it should be okay. There was another hand raised here. Let me take that question first. You had a
I
question.
think it's just important to identify that there's no extra material being covered in the videos, because if we opt not to watch them, and then we receive feedback that the exam will be over video lectures, textbook, and PowerPoint.
And that's a good point, and I think it should have been obvious from the beginning. If it is not, then I apologize. I never cover additional material in the video. That has been the main objective, and I think you do not realize how difficult it sometimes becomes to really align what we are covering in the class and then sequence the chapters in the upcoming weeks, because I get to meet with you only once in a month. So it is obvious. Well, it's obviously not obvious. Otherwise, I would not be getting all these questions. The videos that are uploaded are part of the material that we already cover in the class, that we already covered in the discussions that we had in our 1-hour class. It's just additional clarification of those ideas. Does it make sense to you? It was.
I think, go ahead. To your point, I think that's what we're saying is, if we felt everything was clear and communicated, we wouldn't have these questions. So I think you keep saying it's clearly communicated, but the fact that we have so many questions and been giving so much feedback.
So what do you think I should do? That's a valid question. I wanna ask you, what do you think I should do?
Make a one-pager outlining one of the deliverables, like and maybe caveat with an asterisk saying disregard previously uploaded syllabus. Not to be funny, but if you can't reference things that are in Blackboard, what's the point of having them? That's causing confusion. So just make a one-pager on what the deliverables we're going to be graded on, what is extra credit, and then what is the main material to cover and what is supplementary material. Suggestions?
Yeah,
Here.
yeah,
Do you all agree with that?
yeah. Yes.
So I have a different comment. So you said like certain people are different ways. Like I can watch videos, I can read the textbook. It would be really helpful for me if you could like say here are 4 problems each week to basically practice on, and you could post solutions to those other than having like a 3-question exam prep the week of our in-class exam.
I would agree with that. The exam prep, the sample exam that you gave, that was excellent preparation for this test today. That let us know, okay, we are on the right track. If you could get a good grade on that exam, you've done your work.
Didn't I do that for exam number 1 as well?
Yes, sir. And I think what we're saying is throughout the week. So hey, here's the reading for the week. Here's a few questions to test your knowledge and understanding, so you know you did it right. If I pass that and I did a good job on that, then maybe I don't need the supplemental videos, or maybe I don't need, or maybe I prefer the supplemental videos and I don't need to do the Launchpad or the textbook. A few examples or practice problems each week would be helpful for us to know that we're getting it, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, just to put it in perspective, this is our 4th consecutive week of exams. So a lot of our time has been allocated to actually just taking exams. So to study for this one, and for the next ones, it would be nice to know, like, what should we, because it's all in video format, so it just takes time, and time is something we don't have. So with all the supplementary videos, they're great, but could we get a list of, like, when you're reviewing for the exam, these are the 6 videos you should watch. If you have 6 hours, you should watch these 6 videos. And like the other ones, if you have like a question, like dig into them and dive in. But to study, because like last weekend I spent probably 10 hours taking the finance exam, the take-home exam. So I didn't have any time last weekend really to study for this. So to get like a list of, if you have, these are the top videos you should watch to study. That would be really helpful.
So what do you think so far, the material that are appearing in exams, exam 1 and exam 2, are they morely aligned to the Khan Academy video lectures which were uploaded before this course started? So if I did not upload videos for that I recorded, Khan Academy videos would have been what you are just left with. I could have deleted those and simply kept my videos, but then again, some of the students said that they like those videos. So but I will follow exactly what you suggested, because everyone else seems to think that way. So I will post sort of like a guideline as to what you should be doing in that week, the videos that you should be looking at. I will also upload problems that you might basically work around, so that will be sort of like a sample set of questions. I have all those, but what I thought was that what I thought is irrelevant at this point, because I think you would like to have a different structure of this course, and that's fine. Because this course is about you, this is not about me, right? I can have a whole set of different ideas as how I want to execute this course, but this is not what my objective is. That has never been my objective, because I want to be helpful to you. I want to make sure that you get the maximum out of this course. So I will do that. I will every week I will sort of post a set of questions that you can think about and see whether you can answer them, to sort of do a self-assessment. At the same time, get an idea about what materials are to prioritize in that particular week.
I was just going to ask if you could post them, like same time each week, because I do all my homework on Sundays, but some of these guys may do them on Thursdays or.
I understand that, and I think I have alleviated that problem in the second week of this course. Starting from the last two, as I mentioned, since I think Monopoly or I think I think it's starting from Perfect Competition, which is basically the material that were covered in this exam. I have uploaded everything before Sunday came. The latest, so I sometimes delay a little bit to upload your articles in Eco 360 because I have to look for articles that I think are interesting, and sometimes something pops up very recently. So that also is to sort of help you to get the latest ideas that are consistent with the kind of questions that I'm interested in. Just a point to note, there are two basic objectives of the weekly articles. One is to really understand what is happening outside. The other one is that every week there are four or five questions. If you look at it, every week I pose a question, set of questions that, hey, what do you think? Is doing to this market? What do you think? Does this particular firm has any kind of market power? If it does, how do you assess that? That could also help you in trying to do a self-assessment of whether you understand these ideas. But I guess since this is the course, this is a theoretical course, having some kind of sample questions could be useful. Yes, ma'am.
To this point, and if you've already mentioned, I'm sorry, but through the discussion, we get credit and extra credit if we just fill in our 2 weeks of information.
Yes.
So to answer questions in a different week is just to further enhance our knowledge, right?
Well, first of all, if you have looked at exam number 1, where one of the question was directly from an article, you will also face similar kind of questions in the third exam, where the questions will be basically taken from weekly articles, which means that it is not the responsibility of a certain group to look at those questions in the week articles. Everyone should look at them, and not only you should be looking at those questions, you should also be looking at what other people are saying, because everyone is making very good sense in those answers. I am super impressed with the kind of comments that you are making to these articles. None of these articles are easy articles, by the way. When you think about Bitcoin issues, this is a very hot topic right now. Because of this very active presence of everyone in internet, Bitcoin is becoming a really viable currency options. And when I see, so you should be looking at there are two reasons of talking about Bitcoin. One is that Bitcoin is interesting, and the second one is Bitcoin is important for your upcoming exam. So I hope that answers your question. So
Credit
since you
is
are,
doing it.
sorry?
So credit and extra credit is only by noon for 2 weeks.
Yes.
And then, okay.
Well, I know that this sounds trivial, and you are probably asking why so much points and extra points are given to that. Just to make this course simple, and just to allocate, have a more efficient allocation of your resources, which is time, which is very important to you and to me. So I will do everything in my power to try to minimize the amount of time that you allocate to this course. Yes?
Just to clarify, the only 2 weeks where we actually have to write something are the 2 weeks we signed up
Yes.
for, and then after that we read the article, we read the
Absolutely.
sentence, and that's it?
I will stop this discussion. If you have any comment, please talk about it during the break. I am running out of time. There are 5 chapters allocated for this particular week of discussion, which is not possible to cover. So towards the end of our class, I'm going to make an announcement about shifting one of the chapters for this discussion to the next one. This has important implications. I'll talk about more about that. I want to start with the first chapter that I'm going to cover, which is pricing strategies according to your syllabus. So, pricing strategy is a very interesting chapter. This is, I think, part of the chapter that So when you think about pricing strategies, and pricing strategies basically correspond to firms that has market power. If you are a firm that doesn't have any market power, you basically, the only pricing strategy that you have is to follow the market price. So you don't actually have a strategy, it's just to follow what is happening in the market. So a pricing strategy is basically a firm's method of pricing their product. If you are in perfect competition, we know that you set your price equal to marginal cost. If you have some kind of market power like monopoly, you will set a price which is higher than your marginal cost. So marginal cost is sometimes called markup. So for a monopolist, you can basically charge a price, with a markup, and you can earn profit. Now, sometimes through various mechanisms, a firm can not only charge a higher price, they can charge a wide variety of different prices to different segments of the market. These markets could be based on, market segmentation could be based on age, experience, gender, and a wide variety of other mechanisms. In economics, segmenting these markets are called discrimination. So this is not to be confused with what you mean by discrimination in real world. Price discrimination refers to how producers charge different prices to different segments of the market. This is a very, very important topic. So, the starting point of the discussion of price discrimination is that in order to price discriminate or charge different prices to different segments of the power market, you need two critical ingredients. First of all, you need to have market power, which means that if you are a small firm with no credible market share, charging different prices to different segments have no impact, number one. Number two is that you also need to know these different segments of the market.
Is this deck uploaded somewhere?
No. Okay, so price discrimination is important in the sense that we are going to be looking at how the firm can basically discriminate different parts of the market. Okay, the objective of price discrimination is obvious: to earn more profit, to try to expand the profit margin of a firm. In order to have an effective price discrimination mechanism, the firm first of all needs to have a market power, and then the second one is not that obvious, so let me just walk you through that. Firm has to have the power to prevent reselling and arbitrage. What does that mean? It means that firm has to have the power so that somebody buys something for a firm at a lower price and then goes to the market and resell that at a higher price. Because if a person is allowed to engage in an arbitrage like that, it basically destroys the capacity of the firm to discriminate between different buyers. So sometimes there are various ways a firm initiates arbitrage. Any example that comes to your mind? Yes.
In the very old days, whenever WorldCom was buying minutes from MCI, before the merger, and they would go out and resell those minutes. They bought them at a quantity discount, and they go sell them to smaller customers and make a profit off what they were doing.
Right, and that is exactly that is very much right. That is exactly what is being tried to prevent. They are trying to prevent that. So this kind of arbitrage opportunities, the word arbitrage basically came from stock market. I am not really comfortable having the word arbitrage in this kind of scenario, because the scenario that you just talked about has a time gap between when the first transaction took place and the time the second transaction took place. And when there is a sufficient time gap between those two, arbitrage is irrelevant. But again, they wanted to sound cool, so they added the word arbitrage. But I hope you all understand that. So they are trying to prevent reselling of the goods, which they can do in a variety of different ways. Sometimes you could use a product, once the product label is removed, you cannot resell it. That's a simple way of preventing reselling. Okay, so we are going to look at basically three different kinds of price discrimination, each of them based on certain conditions that exist in that particular market. We're going to start with obviously the one that where the largest amount of price discrimination is possible. This is called first degree price discrimination. So in this kind of mechanism, firm has market power. It can prevent reselling. I will stop mentioning this from the next one because this has to be the first condition. Customers have different demand curves, so firm knows each of the customers and they know the demand curve for each of the customers. Not only that is the fact, the third condition is also very, very important. The third condition is that not only do consumers have different demand curve, firm knows about those demand curve. What does that mean? It means that in this unrealistic scenario, firm has complete information about their buyers. Firm knows how much each individual is willing to pay for their product, and if they have this perfect information, firm will charge different consumers different price based on how much they're willing to pay. Simple idea. The one example that I would have come up with, this is an unrealistic assumption because we know for sure in real life firms do not know everything about their buyer. They can get very close to understanding what the buyer needs, but identifying each buyer is kind of big deal and is nearly impossible. The only thing that comes to my mind is an auction, but a very specific kind of auction. There are a variety of different auctions which we are going to talk about in our next meeting. The auction where the highest bidder gets the good is probably close to a perfect price discrimination, because in that case the person who has the highest willingness to pay is getting the goods. So it means that if you assume that the person is bidding a price that he or she is willing to pay, the price corresponds to the good that he or she is buying. So that could be a way the firm is basically selling at a price that is consistent with an individual. So in this way, a firm is basically connecting a specific person's preference to the price that he is willing to pay. The graphical interpretation of that, or the theoretical interpretation of that, this perfect price discrimination is pretty amazing. So if you are a firm that can charge different price to different consumers, the price that the consumer is willing to pay, so you're not forcing that person to pay that, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Your Honor, them to decide the price and they'll take it at.
Right? So, what is the implication of that? What do you think?
Maximizing your profits.
Well, if it changes by customer, wouldn't it be more like points instead of a line?
In reference to what? In reference to a demand card?
Yeah, the graph's going to look differently because it's not like you're dealing with a quantity or you're dealing with individual segments.
Okay, but these people are all on a demand curve, right? Different people are on different points of the demand curve because demand curve shows at what price how much the consumer is willing to buy. So your demand curve could be a continuous line. There is nothing wrong with that. One argument was that it probably is going to yield you the maximum amount of profit that you can get. Why? Because you get to charge everyone a different price. And not only a different price, the price that an individual is willing to pay. So remember, if you remember, we talked about something called consumer surplus and producer surplus in a previous discussion. But consumer surplus is the gap between what the consumer wants to pay and what the consumer actually pays in the market. Consumer wants to maximize the gap between these two because anytime the consumer pays less than what he is willing to pay, he gets something called consumer surplus. But in this case, when the producer is charging exactly what the consumer is willing to pay, the producer is absorbing the whole amount of consumer surplus from the market. So what we have are three remarkable results. One, profit is maximized, should be obvious. The second one is that the producer absorbs all the consumer surplus from the economy. And the third one is kind of interesting. Before I talk about the third implications, let's look at sort of like a comparative picture of what happens between market competition, which is our idealistic market structure, to a market where there are some kind of market imperfections. We can think of it as monopoly and perfect discrimination. Three things all embedded in one picture. So let's analyze the picture, the graphical setup before we start looking at it. You have a straight line, marginal cost curve, just to prevent confusions. Marginal cost curve really doesn't look like that, but we are doing it anyway. We have a marginal revenue curve, we have a demand curve. This is a setup that you can use to analyze both imperfect competition such as monopoly and perfect competition. We know that in monopoly, we find equilibrium where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. We go up to the demand curve and we find the monopoly price. So PM is your monopoly price, QM is your monopoly quantity, and then you know that your perfect competition equilibrium will be found where your price is basically equal to your marginal cost. So at a point where marginal cost intersects the demand curve will be your perfect competition quantity at the horizontal axis, and the perfect competition price will be equal to the marginal cost. So PC your perfect competition price, PM your monopoly price. When we compare PC, perfect competition with monopoly, you notice that in perfect competition, your consumer surplus is A plus B plus C. The area above the market price, below the demand curve, which is indicated here. Since our marginal cost curve is a straight line, in perfect competition, our producer does not have any surplus. This is an artification because we want to be able to expose this idea of how perfect competition affects the market. So producer surplus in perfect competition is 0. Now when the market converts from perfect competition to an imperfectly competitive market, the market price rises to BM. We know that consumer surplus becomes smaller, it is now A, and you have a producer surplus which is now B. Moreover, in imperfect competition, you have a deadweight loss of C. So that's already covered in the previous discussions that you had. In monopoly or in an imperfect competition, you have a deadweight loss such as C, and you can see clearly that producer surplus have gone up and consumer surplus has gone down. What is remarkable is that when you are an imperfectly competitive firm, let's say you are a monopoly, but you are charging price equal to exactly what the buyer is willing to pay. What you do is that you can produce at the perfectly competitive market price, and you can produce the perfectly competitive quantity. Why would you want to do that? Because you do not have a single price anymore. Every point on the demand curve indicates the different price that you will charge to different consumer who is now going to buy that specific quantity. Are we all clear on that? So what will happen is that instead of just being satisfied with B, you are going to absorb the entire consumer surplus of the consumer. You are going to absorb A, you already have B, but more importantly, you are also going to absorb C. So in perfect price discrimination, your producer surplus is A, B, and C. What does that mean? In perfectly price discrimination, there is no deadweight loss. This is a remarkable answer. Why? Because I don't know whether this is true in reality, but what it tells us that an imperfectly competitive market can also be economically efficient because it has no deadweight loss. that is raised here in this question, and I can assure you that this question is in your upcoming exam. Okay? So does anyone have any question related to perfect price discrimination? Okay, the next one is another kind of price discrimination. This is sometimes what we call a third degree price discrimination. So we started with first degree price discrimination. There is a second degree price discrimination later on. Let's talk about the third degree price discrimination. This is a little bit different. Let's look at how this discrimination is done. I'm going to skip the first two. The main point here is that firms do not have perfect information on everyone. What does that mean? It means that they know that there are some different kinds of consumers in the market, but they cannot identify them on an individual specific basis. What firms can do in this case is that they know that there are segments of the market that exist. So the market is not perfectly identifiable, but at least the segments of the markets are. So when the segments of the market are identifiable, the answer is easy. Firm will charge different price to different segments rather than different individuals. There are countless examples like that. Different ticket price for different age groups, employee discounts. These are all examples of third degree price discrimination, where you give different price to different segments of the market, where the market could be segmented based on age, based on their employment affiliation. Makes sense? Okay, how does that look like? Okay, so what you have here on the left side, let me walk you through this, is an example of a situation where market is segmented. The example here is a annual race competition where the competition takes place in a particular city, where visitors from outside comes in and participate in the competition, and also there are local representatives. And for a firm, they know the market, how the market is segmented. The market is segmented between the outsiders and the locals. Now, a firm would like to charge different price to this different group. The question is why? What's the intuition before we explain? So there are outsiders who are participating in this market, in this competition, and there are local. Whom do you want to charge a higher price?
Outsiders.
Absolutely. Why? Because they have come all the way to participate in this particular competition. So their demand curve is much steeper. Right? Okay, so you charge a price of $220 for the visitors, and you charge a different price for the locals. The producer surplus that you get for these two markets are those, the green areas, right? So that's basically the objective of a third degree price discrimination. There's a problem here. The problem here is that in both of these markets, these triangles are dead weight loss. So we know from the beginning that there are dead weight loss in this market. This kind of pricing is not economically efficient. We all know that. But in addition to that, there is a problem. In this particular example, you know who are the outside competitors who are coming and the locals. Sometimes you know that the market segmentation is there, but you simply don't see them. You cannot identify them. You know it exists, but you don't know how to segment it. Am I making any sense? So what happens is that when you know that the market is segmented, but you cannot identify the market segments, you face what we call a kinked demand curve, where part of the upper part of the demand curve is basically coming from them, people who are willing to pay a higher price, and the lower part of the demand curve comes from them, the locals, who is willing to pay a lower price and are more flexible or have a higher elasticity for their demand. Do we all see that? Do we all see how the kinked demand curve is coming from? They are coming from two different segments of the market. The classic example of a kinked demand is electricity. So electricity providers charge different prices for different segments of the market. There is a residential segment and then there is a commercial segment of the market that buys the same electricity from the same providers. And you can see that sometimes those providers are faced with a king demand curve, and this could make things interesting. Notice that when you have a king demand curve and you cannot identify these different segments, you are forced to charge a uniform price for both of these segments. Do we all see that? In case of a perfectly identifiable segments, you are charging them different prices. In case of a king demand curve, you are charging a uniform price. That doesn't really sound a big deal for us, but it is. Think about it. My question to you is that where do you think the deadweight loss would be larger? Which of these pricing mechanisms do you think is more economically inefficient?
More inefficient?
Yeah.
Need single price.
Why?
Because you're not just going from the fact that with perfect price discrimination, you're able to. Hey, so
I apologize. Let me revise my question.
Okay.
Between these two examples, where you have a perfect understanding about the two segments. By the way, you cannot identify each of the buyers.
Okay.
You only identify the two segments. Here, you don't identify the two
the
segments.
fact that you're able to identify two allows you to set more of the consumer surplus.
So, you think that here you are absorbing more consumer surplus than here? Or the other way around?
I take my answer back.
No.
I mean, it depends on where on the demand curve I would fit. I'd have another proportion between the local and the far away people in the actual example to answer the question completely.
Okay. Any other thought on this? So, where do you think the overall consumer surplus of the economy is larger? Here or here?
So the right-hand graph.
So you think that the consumer surplus is here? Is that just a graphical confusion, or does everyone agree with that? So his argument is that here the consumer surplus is larger than here, because here consumer surplus is this one and that one, and here the consumer surplus is pretty identifiable. You're right. Why? Because since they can identify these two groups, they are obviously charging a higher price, at least to one of the groups, right? So that group surely has a lower consumer surplus, right? That's a very good observation. So, a king demand curve has a smaller consumer surplus. Does it have a larger producer surplus? Hard to say, right? Because it is true that the uniform price that our producer is charging is higher for one group, but it's lower for the other. So we really don't know. It's very hard to say. We're going to take a break immediately right now. But before you go, what we should notice is that this deadweight loss that is being created here is probably same as the deadweight loss associated with the previous one. So by being able to identify the segment or not being able to identify the segment, market segment, really does not improve or change the market inefficiency. So in general, our third degree price discrimination is also economically inefficient. Let's take a quick break. Let's come back after 10 minutes. I apologize. I have spent some time talking about other issues, but those were important. So when we come back, we're going to finish this chapter and we're going to immediately start the next one. Yes.
Do you have this available as a Blackboard?
No, it's not. More changes in your and I should not be adopting a different strategy. Thank you.
I'm going to go skiing.
That's for everything.
Somehow my computer just
We just wanted to know. That's how it is. Elaborate on
That's not true.
doesn't matter. They're all the same. I'm not gonna. I see what you're right. I'm trying. Is that your name or have to say something? I forgot here. Yeah.
I have uploaded the PowerPoint slides. Okay, so let us begin.
Almost as if
Let's begin. So we were talking about price discrimination. We just covered two kinds of price discrimination. One was perfect price discrimination, where a firm charges everyone a different price based on his or her willingness to pay. And then we talked about a third degree price discrimination, where the firm charges different prices to different segments of the market. And we found that third degree price discrimination or price discrimination based on market segmentation is economically inefficient because it creates deadweight loss. Your first degree price discrimination does not. Let us now look at a third kind of price discrimination, which we will call second degree price discrimination. But before we move on, the two price discrimination that we have just talked about, they are basically direct price discrimination. What does that mean? It means that in either of those two cases, the firm looks at the market and directly charges a different price to different individuals or different segments of the market. So the price discrimination in first and third are always directly affecting the market. It directly affects the consumers, the producers, and everyone else. On the other hand, we will now start looking at price discrimination which are a little bit more indirect, in the sense that our firm really do not know how to distinguish different buyers. They probably have some idea that, hey, we know that there are some people who are more willing to buy this good than less, but they don't really have a mechanism to identify them. So you see, information is at the heart of this chapter. For the direct price discrimination, firms have either perfect or some segmented information about the market. In case of the ones that we're going to look at, firms have very little information about what the buyer wants to buy and more importantly, what price the buyer wants to pay. But then, he has market power, the firm has market power, and the firm would like to try to maximize their profit. And then, what they're going to do, they're going to talk about second degree price discrimination, where they're going to adopt various strategies. One of them is called a quantity discount. I think all of you are familiar with that. But we are going to be very careful in explaining why quantity discount is different from a set of other mechanisms that we're going to have to see. So our focus here is that we argue that quantity discount is a second degree price discrimination. It's an indirect price discrimination. What does that mean? It means that you do not know who is who or how much they're willing to pay. You offer them a pricing mechanism which you are going to call discount, and the magical thing about it is that based on the discount, the buyers will reveal themselves as what they are. How do you do that? You will do that because the discounts that you are going to be offering them are what we call incentive compatible. Let's start with this word, incentive compatibility. Incentive compatibility refers to an idea that when you offer a contract or a price, only the contract or the price will be accepted by only to those that you want them to accept. Let's come one step back. So I would like to have certain fragment of the market pay a certain price for the product, but I don't know who they are. But if I am smart, if I can devise a price in which only that part of the market segment is going to pay that price, my problem is solved. Do we all see that? This is a much more challenging, but at the same time much more realistic approach to price discrimination. And discount is surprisingly an efficient mechanism of ways through which buyers reveal who they are. We're going to look at some really interesting examples. Examples of car discounts. Now, before we do that, sort of like an initial discussion about the problem with discount. The problem with discount is that sometimes too much discount is bad. Why? You do? So you have to be, first of all, very careful about whether discounts are really hurting your profit rather than increasing your profit. That obviously is an issue. There are other issues, because remember, the objective of the discount is not to give some benefit to the buyer, right? It is the objective of the discount is to find a way to distinguish who is who. Because some people respond to discounts, others don't. Who responds to discounts and who does not? Can we think about a generic consumer who does not respond to discounts?
So consumers that have a more disposable income may not respond the same as someone that has a certain amount of money and needs that discount.
Okay, so you are thinking of it from an income perspective. Any other thought? I'll come back to that in a minute.
Could depend on the elasticity of
Absolutely, absolutely it does, right? So let's say you buy milk every day because you have 4 children, right? Do you really care about discounts? For milk, be very careful. So let's start with that. So milk, a huge discount is being given on milk, and you buy a lot of milk. Do you really are going to buy more milk when you are already buying a lot and there is a discount? No, you won't.
It depends on what
Yeah.
kind of milk you're buying. And I only say this because
No, it's true. But think about it.
My wife for a period of time was vegan, and we went with almond milk, which isn't true milk, but
Which isn't true.
when she got pregnant,
That is true. I
when
know.
she got pregnant, she started eating dairy again. But we decided to get the organic milk because it was nicer. And that costs almost twice as much than regular milk. So if I'm doing the shopping and I see there's a discount on milk, especially organic milk,
you're going to probably buy a lot.
It's
true. So it obviously depends on how disposable or how non-durable the goods are. Here we're basically talking about a non-durable example. So if you have a very high, if you have a low price elasticity and the good is a non-durable good, you probably would not be interested in buying that good, even when there is a steep discount. Income, just give me a minute. Income could also be an important issue. If the good in question has a very small fraction of your budget, like salt, a discount on salt really does not get you excited. But a discount on car might, right? Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say we only have such large refrigerators, right? So the max amount of milk you can buy is really determined by the amount of refrigeration space. So there is a max, like it.
Right. There are a lot of capacity constraints, a lot of various factors that we can think about. But I think again, just like the U-Ball example, we can generalize this, right? We know that everything that we have just talked about are important. But they can all be summarized through one term, elasticity, right? So if somebody has a low elasticity, discount probably is not a big deal for him. But if that person has a higher elasticity for that good, the person could respond heavily towards that particular discount. So firm needs to be very careful not to make the discount too much, because sometimes it will just be where firm is losing money and making less profit, without really helping the firm to identify different segments of the market. Let's look at the example. Examples are going to be the main focus of today's class. We're going to do a lot of examples today, in different chapters. So, the first example, can you guys see it from the back side? I apologize, the copy pasting thing has somehow created problems. So this is an example of two cars, Toyota Camry, Lexus. There are two kinds of buyers in this market, a budget consumer and a luxury consumer. I hope we all understand who they are, right? So budget consumer is willing to pay $28,000 for a Toyota Camry, and a luxury consumer is willing to pay $30,000 for a Toyota Camry. These are his quantity demanded. This is his price. For a luxury car, a budget consumer is willing to pay $31,000 and a luxury consumer is willing to pay $43,000. These are all consistent numbers, right? Okay, now let's see that Toyota offers a discount. They sell to a Camry for $26,000 and a Lexus, which is a luxury car, for $38,000. A big discount. Notice that these discounts are fascinating, right? The budget consumer who is willing to pay $28,000 for a Toyota Camry can buy this car for $26,000 and he's gonna get a consumer surplus of $2,000. If he notice that our budget consumer is willing to pay $31,000 for Toyota Camry, and Toyota is offering that. Our budget consumer is willing to pay $31,000 for the luxury car, and the Toyota is offering that for $38,000. Will he buy the luxury car? He should not, because if he buys that, he is paying more than what he is willing to pay, right? Do we all see the objective of this discount? The objective of the discount is to force the budget consumer to buy his budget car, to reveal himself and segment the market. Make sense? So, our budget consumer is going to buy the cheap car, Camry, and our luxury consumer, he was willing to pay $43,000 for a luxury car when he sees this $38,000 which is a discounted price, he's gonna jump and buy the luxury car. This is a perfect discount mechanism where you force the markets, the consumers to segment themselves. This kind of discount mechanism can quickly backfire. Let's look at the next example. Okay, so the same numbers, nothing have changed. Let's say Toyota is charging $40,000 for a Lexus. That's a luxury car. So same mechanism you are now offering, sort of like a little bit of discount, not too much. Notice what is happening. Our budget consumer still buys the Camry. There is no problem with that because he simply cannot afford the luxury car. But notice what something is happening to the luxury consumer. He was willing to pay $43,000 for the luxury car. When he sees this price, he knows that if he buys this, the consumer surplus that he is going to get is $3,000. Right? By the way, our luxury consumer can also buy the budget car. Right? Our luxury consumer is willing to pay $30,000 for the Camry. And what is the price of the Camry? The price of the Camry is $26,000, right? So, if our luxury consumer buys the Camry for $26,000, he gets a consumer surplus of $4,000. If he buys an economy car, he gets a consumer surplus of $4,000. If he buys his luxury car, he gets a $3,000 consumer surplus. So what will happen? Our luxury consumer will also end up buying the Camry. Right? Do we all see the point? Because we are ignoring obviously issues like prestige, preference. These are all important issues. A lot of people could argue, including myself, that probably a luxury car is an inferior good. Well, it's not an inferior, it's a luxury good, which means that if the price of the car goes up, your demand for that good goes up, which is kind of unusual. A lot of things. But if you ignore this, you can see that a slight change in the discount mechanism can make the mechanism completely irrelevant for the firm. Because with this kind of discount, everyone ends up buying the cheaper car, and at the end, our firm loses, by the way. Right? You see that?
Does the firm really lose? We don't know the margins.
That's a good question. You're right, but when you have one part of your production line remaining unsold, I think it's a loss for the firm. Right? Yes, please.
So this is assuming that the firm knows what the consumer is willing to pay. Is that how they base their discounts, or? Because if they don't.
In this theoretical example, good question. That's a very good question. In this theoretical examples, they at least have a decent understanding about the marginal willingness to pay by the buyer. And even when they know that, notice that the reason why this firm basically ends up in the losing end is because they became too greedy. They wanted to charge too much for their cheaper car, and by doing that, they push the price of the price of the luxury car more closer to what the people are willing to pay for that market. So that's a mistake. Do you see that point? So you have to give everyone some kind of wiggling space, right? So that everyone, both segments of the market, can enjoy a little bit of consumer surplus, and then they will reveal who they are. Otherwise, they will hide. This is a hide and seek game, by the way. Companies like Toyota spends billions of dollars worldwide just to understand who is who. Okay, so these are the three main kinds of price discrimination, but then there are other ones as well. Let's look at some of those. This is a very interesting chapter. The next mechanism, which is called an indirect price discrimination mechanism as well, because firms don't see who is who, are called versioning. You all know what that is, right? So a firm sells two versions of the same good to two different parts of the market. Notice that firms do not need to know who is who. They will just offer two different versions of the same product, offer two different prices, and people will reveal themselves. A frequent flyer will take one kind of price versus somebody who basically is traveling for leisure. So they will. So you see the point. So the classic example of versioning is offering two different prices for the same ticket. Right? One is what we call a frequent flyer price, and the other one is a business luxury price. Right? So how will you do that? That's a trivial question, but I want to get an idea. How do you offer two different prices for the same product, which is basically a flight?
Well, in this case, I'm assuming certain people would have a category like, you're a silver or platinum member, which affords you to look at this different price, whereas a normal consumer wouldn't even get to know that price existed.
Okay, I wanna come back to your point later on. Every airplane has this class, right? First class, second class, executive class. What are these?
Well, the difference is one has to travel, the other one doesn't.
Well, these are versioning, isn't that right? Yeah. Oh, these are versions. These are versions of the same flight. Where if you are a frequent flyer, I'm ignoring the fact that if you are a frequent flyer, most of the times your tickets are being paid by someone else. That's a different problem. Just ignore that for the time being, right?
A business is more willing to pay a higher price because of the fact that they have to travel for those meetings, whereas the guy going for leisure, he has the option not to fly.
Very good. That again comes back to the point that one of them has a higher price elasticity than the other one. So price elasticity, as was pointed by one of you, I'm really glad that I actually have got like a very big core economics argument on that. These are all examples of versioning. There was another answer here. Yes.
The way they separate that is by the time window when you're buying.
Yes.
And because very few people travel for leisure on very short notice.
Right.
But I got to buy a plane ticket to be in Detroit tomorrow.
Correct, true.
And then the Saturday night stay rule that they keep in place a lot.
Again, we can generalize, you're very much right. We can generalize that idea by pointing out that based on how these two groups are flying, they will face two different kind of prices. If you want to buy a ticket at a very short notice, you will pay more. Make no mistake, right? So that basically corresponds to the idea that we are saying, is that by you being a frequent flyer, you probably are paying a different price than someone else. By the way, everyone is traveling on the same plane. So that's an example of versioning, right?
But under that, you are flying on the same plane, but you're also paying for a different experience.
That corresponds to what we talked about preferences, and let's not just go there. Because preferences are sometimes things that are very difficult to quantify. But preferences are important. The Lexus Toyota example that we just talked about, I know a lot of people who will never buy a Toyota Camry. And I'm not making this up. I think you all have met people like that, right? My brother-in-law never buys Toyota. Right? So, and that is entirely related to preference. It has got nothing to do with what groups you are buying. But these are important issues. Okay? Let's ignore that for the time being. The versioning works when the marginal cost, you don't need to know this, but the markup must be higher for segment with less elastic demand than the segment with a more elastic demand, like what was mentioned by the luxury one, like here. That was a very, very good answer. So it is true that if you have a very inelastic demand, you will end up paying a high price because you are a frequent flyer, right? On the other hand, if you're a luxury, sort of flyer where you fly once a year, like I do, you are probably very sensitive to price. Okay, couponing, coupons. Another one. Okay, so let's try to understand what coupons do. So coupons are also a form of price discriminations. Retailers would like to charge customers with less elastic demand curve more. Is this true? Who uses coupons, by the way?
Budget
There is a problem with the way the textbook is explaining coupons. And I don't think their explanation is true. So they are saying that coupons are being used by people who are not buying this good more frequently. So I get a coupon for Shogun and I go there. Otherwise, I probably visit that place once a year. Is anyone familiar with Shogun? So some of you have been there. It's nice. If you haven't, please make yourself go there once. It's just a good experience. Sorry? They're pricey, but they're
Then she
good.
said, did you have a coupon?
No, I know. If I had that, I would have used it myself. So the argument here is that they are arguing that people who use coupons are people who has probably more elastic demand. That's not really true. That's not true. I think it's not, because if you go to Walmart, you will see that a lot of people buy milk on a regular basis, and they will also continuously use coupons. So I guess linking the coupon experience or coupon discrimination with real life can be complicated. But we understand that couponing is a way to discriminate price. So that people who uses coupon pay a lower price, who does not pay a higher price. Okay, bundling, the last one. Bundling. Bundling is very complicated. We hardly pay attention to bundling, but increasingly this is becoming the most common form of price discrimination. So what is bundling? It's a price strategy in which firm sells two or more products together at a single price. Okay, the condition is that firms have market power and they can prevent resale. I'm not going to say it anymore. The condition that guarantees that bundling is good for a firm is that the consumer's demand for one product is negatively correlated with their demand for the other one. I'll explain that in a minute. So let's say you are bundling two goods, and the only way bundling can be profitable for a firm is if the demand for the first good is negatively related to the demand for the second good, which means that if your demand for one good increases, your demand for the other good goes down. Let's look at some examples in a minute. We all are familiar with the classic examples of bundling, right? Cable services. And it is becoming increasingly difficult to get unbundled cable services. Although Sling TV is giving us a very good deal now, right? Does anyone have Sling TV?
I've used it.
Yeah, okay, so I do, and increasingly you are going to see services that will try to unbundle these cable services. So we are heading towards a major warfare between traditional cable services and the non-traditional ones. Let's look at that example. I'm going to walk you through the examples and I'm going to talk about it slowly. These are not simple issues. Let's start with an example where you have two people, Madison, Dakota. We have two different cable channels, ESPN, history, and we have some pricing options available to them. Okay? And we also have a bundle price that are being offered where both of these are offered at the same time. Notice that in this particular example, when the demand for, so by the way, these are numbers, these are prices, right? These are prices. These are prices, but the prices are basically valuation, right? Valuation of how much our consumer is willing to pay, right? Notice that when Dakota is willing to pay more for the same services than the first person, she is also willing to pay more for the history channel as well. So this person is willing to pay more for both of the channels that are being offered. Should you offer a bundle price for these two goods to this person? So this person is willing to pay more for both. No, why not?
Because she's going to pay it anyway.
Yeah.
I want the profit.
We're gonna crunch numbers, but please, numbers are not important. It's the idea that are important, right? When somebody is willing to already buy more, both of these channels by paying a higher price, why offer some kind of price deal for that person? You see that? So it is for people like me who will not take the ESPN channel that needs that bundle, right? Okay, let's crunch numbers now. Okay, so the bundle prices are 10 and 11. Without bundling, the company can charge a maximum of $9 for ESPN and $1 for history channels. Okay? So if they do that, their total revenue is going to be $20 if they want both Madison and Dakota to subscribe. So if they offer $9 for ESPN, both of them are going to buy because the prices that they're willing to pay is 9 and 10. If they offer a $1, both of them are going to buy. So what will happen? They're going to get 9 plus 1, $10 from Madison, and 10 plus $9 and $1 for these two channels. So it's $10 from each person. So $20. So this is without bundling. With bundling, if they offer a $10 bundle for the two channels, they are going to be able to get both of these customers. Because if they offer a bundle of $10, Madison is going to buy it and Dakota is also going to buy it because Dakota gets the benefit out of that package. But the problem here is that there is basically no gain by offering this bundle. They are getting the same $20. Now what we will do, in order to show that sometimes bundling helps, we are going to offer the same packages, bundling packages. But in a different scenario, it is going to benefit our cable companies. So what is that condition? The condition is when the valuations are negatively correlated. Let's analyze the numbers. These are very subtle differences, but small differences matter. When the demand for ESPN goes from 9 to 10, the demand for history goes down. Do you see that? We need to convince ourselves what the numbers are saying before we move on. Any question? Very similar examples. In the first one, when the demand for ESPN was going up, demand for history channel was also going up. But in this case, second case, our consumer is substituting. They are substituting. If they want more ESPN, they want less history channel. And that is the scenario when we would like to offer them bundles. Fascinating, right? Makes sense? Now, if they offer the same bundle, notice they are offering the same bundle, they are going to offer a bundle of $10. So, without the bundle, if they charge $9 and $1, the same one that they were doing before. So, if I offer $9 and $1 for these two channels, they are still going to get $20 revenue, right? Both of them are going to buy that because it's consistent with how much they are willing to pay. 10 plus 10 is 20. But when they offer a bundle, notice that previously they were offering a bundle for $10. Now they are offering a bundle of $10.50. Why didn't they offer this bundle in the first case? Because if they offered that bundle $10.50, none of them would have bought this. Do you see that?
But
Sorry, after that. Just Madison would not buy it, right? Because if they offer a bundle price of $10.50, Madison would say, hey, I was willing to pay separately for $10 for this, I'm not gonna buy it. But Dakota would still buy it because Dakota was willing to pay $11.50. Now, as a result of this negative correlation, if they offer $10.50, let's see who is willing to buy this bundle. Is the first person willing to buy that bundle? Yes. Is the second person willing to buy that bundle? Also yes. Okay, so if they buy the bundle, company gets $10.50 from one, so they get more than $20 from two. They end up getting $21. Okay, yes. Why?
I'm, I guess, a little bit confused.
Yeah, let's walk you through it again.
Because it's not so much walking through it again. Am I seeing the numbers change for Madison on the History Channel, which he's going to buy?
Yes,
Is one on one and 150 on the other?
Yes.
Precisely.
To illustrate the negative correlation.
Right, that's why there is a negative correlation, and the numbers are important. Notice what was happening in the before was that when the demand for ESPN was going up, when the persons were willing to pay a higher price for ESPN, they were also willing to pay a higher price for the History Channel. So there is no point. Our argument suggests that there is no reason to offer a price, a bundle for at least Dakota, because she's already paying a higher price, willing to pay a higher price for both. In this case, it's the other way around. Although when the demand for ESPN is going up because people are willing to pay a higher price, they are willing to pay a lower price for the History Channel. So there is a negative relationship between how they are willing to pay price for these two. So you have to offer them a bundle so that they buy both. And now in this bundle, if you have an appropriate price like the one that is stated, you can increase your profit. So bundling, when properly administered, is a very efficient mechanism through which firms cannot perfectly discriminate the buyers, but that's not important. They can maximize their profit. Okay. We took a break, the last break at 10:10. Let's take a quick break, and I apologize. Let's come back at 11 o'clock. It is a little bit smaller break, but since we have spent some extra time on other issues, we need to cover materials. Everything.
I thought I had
Old face. Yeah, and let's say so you just right. So if you had
It's part of our SEA program. Seriously? Yeah, birds. Yeah, that and Linda. Wait, is this separate from the
Wait, where did you find it?
Yeah, there's an email that we sent out to us. Yeah, let me go get my Gmail and I'll tell you. I ran it through to update my resume because it's like.
That's pretty cool.
Is the BMOS?
Gotta give it
Yeah,
to you.
BMOS, yeah.
If you type in BMOS in your, you should have an email there.
What is it? BMOS? B and then MOS.
Yeah, so it's you want to.
Create your own account.
Obviously. The game time is it.
See, I'm calculating the numbers, numbers based on it. And every time I calculate, yeah, I'm thinking,
Every time. Every time.
It's just like a gal, but it's all one.
So I don't know, there's two camps, right? Some people want to go trade up, hold it for this year, I'm gonna try out.
You can make that like, make that.
For 1 year, so we draft a young quarterback.
I think I don't want to get information that we only need 3.
Of course.
Pretty sure I just driver like 4 students.
It's not semi?
It's gonna. I
think Cross was
I was looking at
started believing you now.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know, but it's I really love it. It's super, like, I think there's really fast. It's touchscreen, it's like touchscreen all the way to make it
because you want to.
Yeah, no, I just bought it. You did. I bought it light.
Hopefully it doesn't record.
So if you have to point.
Let us begin. Let's look at the second topic, which is basically oligopoly. So, perfect price discrimination was an example where firms try to, devise different kinds of ways they can discriminate between different buyers and earn, profit. In the oligopoly chapter, we are again going to go back to our traditional discussions about market, where we will try to understand how various imperfections, market imperfections, affect our producers' decisions. Now, in the previous chapter, the producer decision was only about what prices they are going to charge to, their customers or buyers. But in market imperfections, there are also other issues that we need to be aware of that affects our firm's decisions, and that is competition among them. In an imperfectly competitive market, if it is not monopoly, there are always going to be more than one firm. And when there are more than one firm, there are certain types of competition that arises when you don't have, that might be interesting. And we want to look at that in the context of oligopoly. My favorite market structure to analyze is oligopoly. Why? Because oligopoly is probably the most realistic market structure. If you remember the three market structures that we talked about before, perfect competition, monopoly, and even monopolistic competition, one could argue that without monopolistic, other than monopolistic competition, monopoly and perfect competition are really not realistic. They are theoretical ideas. They are there to capture our understanding about how market mechanisms work and so forth, but this is real. Oligopoly is real. Okay? So an oligopoly market is a market where there is competition between small number of firms. There are natural barriers to entry in these firms, just like monopoly. Each firm has a very large market share. The firms are interdependent, which means that the decision taken by one firm affects the decision taken by the other ones. And when you have a situation where firms are interdependent, there is a strong incentive to collude. Let's define what collusion is. The more common term for collusion is a cartel. I don't like the word cartel because there are legal implications of defining what a cartel is. But make no mistake, collusion and cartel are very similar. A collusion is a situation where a small number of firms, come together, have an agreement, and they come together and operate like a monopoly. Let's be very careful as what you're saying here. This is not a single firm trying to dominate market, but a couple of firms coming together and trying to dominate market like a monopolist. That reminds you of the movie Godfather, right? Cartel is basically an association between several firms where they have an implicit or an explicit understanding and they all operate like a monopolist. Okay? If you can successfully form a cartel, you can raise price, you can restrict quantity, you can make more profit. Okay? Now the problem with that we sometimes don't understand about cartel is that regardless of how profitable a cartel is highly unstable. Why? Because when firms engage in a cartel, the goods that they produce are obviously identical, otherwise they would not collude anyway, because each of them would have a market share, have their own niche in the market. They have to coordinate on their price and quantity decisions, which sometimes they don't like. They cheat. They cheat on each other. Okay? So if there is an incentive for one of the firms in the cartel to deviate from the group's discussion or decision, they are going to destroy the cartel. So let's so let's look at that, and this is, I think, very interesting discussion. We will now look at situations or explain how and why collusions or cartels are unstable. Imagine that there are two firms, A and B. They are producing identical products. They have an inverse demand curve. You don't have to worry about that. What an inverse demand curve is. Basically, the demand curve that you draw in your two-dimensional space is an inverse demand curve. They have a marginal cost, and for the sake of simplicity, we are assuming marginal cost and average cost are the same, $4. If they collude, they can basically set a monopoly price. Are we all clear on that? So what is the monopoly price? Monopoly price is where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Let's define our marginal revenue curve. It is 20 minus 2Q. So a monopolist, an oligopolist acting like a monopolist will set price where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. And when you solve that, you find price to be equal to 12. And from that you can get your monopoly quantity. You can first get the monopoly quantity, which is 8. And when you plug that quantity in the demand function, you get the value of price, which is 12. So given price and quantity, you can calculate the monopoly profit, which is the difference between total revenue and total cost. Now from your cost chapter, you should remember that profit can be written as the difference between price and average cost times the quantity. I should have written it here. I'll add that to your lecture notes. So basically, profit can be written as price minus average cost times the quantity, and when you do that, profit is going to be 64. If there are two firms and they are in a cartel, obviously they will split their profit, so each one of them is going to earn a $32 profit. Very simple explanation. Before I move to the next slide, please ask if you have any question about this scenario. Okay, now both of them jointly decided to produce a quantity of 8. Now one of them defects. One of them starts to cheat. One of them decides to produce 5 units instead of 4, right? When they jointly decided to produce 8 units, they are going to split their production. Each of them were required to produce 4 units in the previous case. Now one of them is trying to be too smart and wants to produce a little bit more, 5 units. Are we all clear on the scenario? The total quantity will now increase to 9. If there is a total quantity that is 9, you can substitute that back to the demand curve. You find that the equilibrium price is going to be 11. And at that equilibrium price, the total profit, you can do the calculation, is going to be 63. And when you split that, you can see that for firm A, who basically wanted to produce more, is going to be able to increase their profit because price is 11, average cost is 4. They have decided to produce more, a little bit more than the other firm. So they get to increase their profit from 32 to 35, but the other firm gets a lower amount of profit because they are producing lower quantity 4 at a higher price. They don't get the same share of profit as before. Are we clear on the numbers? What will happen? This cartel will break down, right? Because firm B will realize that firm A is basically cheating. They are trying to take advantage of that, and cartel breaks down. Very simple idea. So, in order for a cartel to basically exist and persist, you need to have direct and credible coordination between the firms. We can also look at this idea from a graphical perspective. It is not important, but you can understand that if the cartel, these two firms operate like a monopolist. They are going to set a price of $12 and produce the quantity 8. This is the first case scenario. Then, so that would be the cartel outcome, which is basically the monopoly outcome. But then if one firm cheats, tries to produce it a little bit more, by doing that they reduce the price of the market and ends up hurting the other who did not cheat. So this basically output could have been chosen at any of these levels. Our cheating firm can produce within a range of different outputs, and any of those cheating, any of those deviations from cartel agreements is going to break down the cartel. Okay. So we looked at the first example where firms were not really competing with each other. They came together with a coordination, with an agreement, constructed a cartel, and then we saw that the cartel just fell apart. There are other kinds of problems that will arise in this oligopolistic market. Firms, which should be very obvious, are engaged in more intense competition in oligopoly than any other markets. Why? Because there are very few. So the competition between them is very severe. Are we all clear on that? Right? We are going to look at now various kinds of competition that exist under oligopoly. Before I start that, I want to mention that this is a chapter that has received, this is a topic in microeconomics that has received more Nobel Prize than any other topic that we are going to cover. Each of the names that we are going to talk about today are Nobel laureates. Okay? The cartel concept, we did not mention the name of the economist who talked about cartel, got a Nobel Prize. The second name that you are looking at, Horton, French economist, got a Nobel Prize. He started with looking at the price competition between the firms. So his focus was on to understanding how firms compete with price in an oligopoly. Do they charge a different price? If they do, how do they match up each other's price? So basically, he started the term or discussion about what we call a price war. And I'm sure everyone is familiar with that. The best way to understand this is to look at an example. Imagine you have two companies, Target and Walmart, and they are selling the same product, Sony PlayStation. Products are identical. Let's say that the total quantity of PlayStations that can be sold in this market is Q. Walmart has the price of PW, Target has the price of PT. So it's a very simple setup. So the question is, how much will these firms be able to sell? The answer is, it depends where the prices are. For Walmart, if they have a price lower than Target, they will take the entire market. Make sense? They will sell the entire queue. If their price is equal to Target, they are probably going to split the market because, in Fayetteville, the distance between Target and Walmart is like walking distance, right? So if you find the same price, you are indifferent. If Walmart's price is higher than Target, Walmart is going to lose the entire market. And the same is true for Target, right? Do you all see that? In this situation, how do you think they should charge?
Whatever the other person does.
That's not a bad answer, by the way. I want to get your feedback about this. What do you mean by that?
Well, you risk, even by if you try to gain additional profit by raising the price, you risk losing a significant portion, if not all, of the market. However, if you erode the price in order to gain additional market share, you then erode your profit margin as well. There's nothing that's going to keep Target, so if Walmart drops their price, there's nothing to keep Target from later that day, later that hour, matching your price, and then both both firms essentially erode each other's profit margin.
Your point raised a very important issue. I should have mentioned that before. The decisions that we are looking at now are simultaneous decisions, where Walmart and Target are setting their prices simultaneously. This is a much different problem than something that we are going to look at in the next chapter, which I probably will not be able to finish, where players or competitors basically take actions one after another. So ignoring that for the time being, when they are simultaneously changing prices, they probably will end up charging very similar prices. Or even though they are not coordinating, by the way. This is not cartel. This is competition, but the competition has some really unique outcomes. It should be obvious, well, when you think about it, that in this situation, both of them will charge price equal to their marginal cost. Why? Because that's what happens when you have competition. You don't need to have a large number of firms to force firms to charge equal to their marginal cost. 2 firms are sufficient. Because if one firm charges a little bit higher price, the other firm will cut their price, as was mentioned, and the price war will continue until the price converges to their marginal cost. This has unique outcomes. This is imperfect market, by the way, right? Only 2 firms. But what will happen? The price turns out to be equal to marginal cost. Market is efficient, right? Because this is the lowest price. This will have the highest quantity being sold. And we know that as long as price is equal to marginal cost, there is no deadweight loss. So bargain competition will lead to basically, it will lead to like an outcome that is identical to perfect competition outcomes.
Question?
Yes. I saw that one hand raised first. I apologize. Probably you raised it before. I didn't see that.
So how do you explain if a retailer, Walmart, wants to take a loss on something in order to drive traffic into the store so they can margin on all other categories? How does that fall into?
Probably their marginal cost is so low that they can undercut any other competitors, right? Notice that when you are talking about taking a price cut, those price cuts are comparable to smaller retailers, not Target, right? I have never seen these 2 companies undercutting each other's prices by a substantial amount. But it is true that if you buy a product from Best Buy and try to buy the same product in Walmart, almost always you are going to find that price at a cheaper price in Walmart. So having a lower marginal cost makes it a major issue when you are looking at these price wars. One of the things that is making Amazon such a major competitor for Walmart is that Amazon has lower setup cost, which means that there will be a time when the marginal cost of producing something for Amazon will become 0. Isn't that right? Their marginal cost of producing and selling stuff is already close to 0, right? Do you see the seriousness of how these price wars that we are going to that we're looking at could lead to a very different kind of market outcomes? That's a very good question.
Okay, whenever you say they're setting the price simultaneous, are they setting the price simultaneous with knowledge of the other
Yeah, something like that. We are not really too serious about the distinction between simultaneous and sequential moves. In the next chapter,
but we have knowledge of the other person.
Yes, I mean they are looking at what the other person is doing, and this is sort of like a real-time decision-making process, which is basically unrealistic. This theory was developed in 1850. He didn't have any idea about what internet is back then, right?
Okay.
But he had a very clear understanding that this kind of price undercut would lead to price wars. That's why he got a Nobel Prize. Very later on, his work is one of the few works that got Nobel Prize very late. Why? Because original materials were written in French. People did not know what he wrote. They were translated into English later on. And so he got a Nobel Prize at a very late age, well, for works that he done like 50 years before. Very interesting stuff. Okay, so the bottom competition was in terms of price, right? Now we are going to look at a very different kind of competition, another Nobel laureate, another French economist, where the competition is going to be in terms of quantity. Named after Kuno. I hope that at least some of you are familiar with the name. So Kuno competition, it has a very detailed explanation, but the idea here is that here the competition is between quantity. Before I start, let's try to understand how quantity competition and how price competition work. They are very different. Price is very easy to cut and raise. Quantity is not. Are we all clear on that? So the competition between quantity and competition between price are very different, right? Because we have a production process going on. Are we all clear on this? So the quantity competition are going to have much long-term effect in the markets. So how do firms compete in quantity, by the way? Imagine that there is a substantial market out there, and both firms have idea about what the market size is. So they are basically competing for the piece of that pie. Isn't that right? If one of them gets a higher piece of the pie, the other one gets a smaller pie, and vice versa. So in game theoretic terms, we sometimes call Kuno competition a zero-sum game, where if you lose, I win, and if I win, you lose. So you should see clearly that in this kind of quantity competition, decisions by firms are heavily interdependent. Whenever a firm is making their quantity decision, the firm needs to know what the other firm is doing. Okay? This idea of interdependence in the quantity decisions can be best summarized by something called a reaction curve. A reaction curve shows the reaction of a firm in terms of setting their quantity in response to what the competitor is doing. A classic example, a politically motivated example, is about to be shown. So think about Saudi Arabia and Iran. Both of them are producing oil. And how much oil these two countries produce depend on each other, right? They are the first largest and the second largest producers of oil, at least even 5 years ago. Now they are none of them are. Who is the largest producers of oil now? United States. Who is the second largest producers of oil right now? Still Saudi Arabia. No, not Russia. Still Saudi Arabia. But Iran has faced sanctions and some other stuff. So the curve that you're looking at is not a demand curve. It's not a demand curve. It's a reaction curve. So this is on the vertical, you're measuring the quantity of oil produced by Saudi Arabia. In the horizontal axis, you are measuring the quantity of oil produced by Iran. And this is Saudi Arabia's reaction function. What does that mean? It means that when Iran produces less oil, Saudi Arabia produces more oil, and vice versa. This is how Saudi Arabia is looking at their quantity decisions as a reaction to what Iran might do. Iran has a different reaction functions. Their reaction function looks like that, right? They have the same intuition. They are going to make decisions about how much they are going to produce as response to how much they think the Saudi Arabian economy will produce. Yes?
For both these concepts, can you think about the prisoner's dilemma to explain it?
How many of you are familiar with prisoner's dilemma? Just one. Let's not talk about the prisoner's dilemma right now, because prisoner's dilemma will be in your next exam. And I will talk about that in the game theoretic chapter. So yes, you can during the break, if you have some time, you can talk about this, because it's a zero-sum game. A prisoner's dilemma doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. So the equilibrium will be found at the intersection between these two reaction functions. What does that mean? What does that mean for us? Let's walk you through this. At the intersection, it says that Saudi Arabia will produce 20 units and Iran will produce 20 units. This is an artification where it appears that both of them are producing the same. They don't have to. As they can produce whatever they like in equilibrium as long as their beliefs are self-fulfilling. Their beliefs are self-fulfilling. This equilibrium point is on the reaction function on both, right? Which means that if Saudi Arabia produces 20 units, Iran will produce 20 units from Saudi Arabia's perspective. At the same time, since this reaction function is on the, this point is on the reaction function of on Iran's function, it means that Iran also thinks that if they produce 20 units, Saudi Arabia will also produce 20 units. So the equilibrium in this market is when your belief about your opponent is the same belief that your opponent has about you.
But it's just beliefs, not actuals?
Well, that's a good question. That's a very good question. So, what's the difference between beliefs and actions? It's a very good question.
Well, if they just think, okay, if I just think that Anna is producing the exact same amount that I am, but she's really producing 5 more, but I won't be aware of that, correct?
Okay, so let's separate the two ideas. First of all, just to help you understand this, there are no imperfect information, so everyone knows about everything, but that still does not discount the importance of your question. Your question is important. So even if they know everything, are we talking about their beliefs here, or are we talking about actual decisions? The answer is they're both. They're both. And that's where we will again talk about self-fulfilling prophecy towards the end of this course, where we will argue that whenever you take an action, your action has to be verified by your beliefs. And the belief is not about you, it's about your opponents, right? So you can think about your beliefs basically, affecting or guiding your economic decisions. As long as your beliefs are consistent, your actual production decisions are also be consistent with this conclusion that we just had. Does that answer your question? In reality, sometimes beliefs are mistaken because they hide information, and I think that's where your argument came from. And obviously, we all understand that when there is imperfect information in this case, your beliefs and your production decisions are not self-fulfilling. Very, very good question. The best question of today's class. Okay. Any other question? Okay. Let's have a quick summary about the 3 kinds of markets that we have looked at so far in an imperfectly competitive market. We have looked at barter competition, where firms engage in price competition. We have just looked at Kurlo competition, where firms engage into quantity competition, and we have our traditional monopoly, where firms simply act like, firms simply produce whatever they want to produce that buyers wants to buy and charge the highest possible price. So basically QM is cartel here, right? Because we don't have monopoly, but we have cartel that acts like a monopolist. It should be obvious that in the bartered case, you produce the largest quantity of goods. How do we know that?
As the price goes down, the zero demand will go up.
Something like that, and in barter competition, since they are competing with price, you are having the lowest possible price in the market. So that will obviously produce the highest possible quantity. So if this makes sense to you, this will also make sense to you. Just compare these two together. So we are saying that our barter competition produces the largest quantity and charges the lowest price. Make sense? Does it make sense? The last model, and I will just give you a sketch because I am running out of time, is called a Stackelberg Model. Shockingly, another Nobel Prize. I've just talked about 5, sort of 4 different ideas. Each of them were awarded a Nobel Prize because of how important they are. In the Stackelberg model, we are slowly going to move towards situations where decisions are not simultaneous, because simultaneous decisions are almost always misleading, right? So imagine the same kind of Kuno competition where firms are trying to compete with each other in terms of how much they produce. But now you have decisions made by firms which are sequential, which means one firm makes the decision of how much they produce, and the other firm looks at that and makes their production decisions. So, in a Stackelberg environment, we are assuming that there is a first mover advantage. The first mover advantage refers to the decisions taken by the incumbent of the market, somebody who has been around for a while. And they are always the person who is making the first move. Makes sense? Are we all clear on what a first mover advantage is?
Are we talking theoretical or do you want to go practical?
No, I want a practical answer to that.
Okay, and the gasoline market that I see in one particular market, you had a dominant firm and then some less dominant firms. Less dominant firms would try to lower the market price, temporarily catch it, but the dominant firm would definitely go in and punish you by taking it below the marginal cost.
Right.
And leave it there for a while until you learn your lesson.
So the dominant firm, in this particular discussion, we are going to call the dominant firm a leader.
Okay.
A leader is basically the first mover. A leader is usually the incumbent.
The other firm would be the first one.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. At this point, we are not going to go too much into that, but you're right. It could be both. It could be that the incumbent makes the first move, the entrant makes the first move, and then the incumbent responds to that.
The incumbent always has advantage.
Yeah. I'm not so sure. It could be both way around because okay. So let's see how much of the game theory stuff that we can cover, because I want to talk about backward induction. That if we understand that, we don't have any problem of understanding who has the advantage. I think both of them could have an advantage. Okay, we can understand before we move on. So this is the first mover advantage, where the incumbent could make a move, or whoever moves first has an advantage, right? Do you understand that? Because the follower, because if you think about the leader and the follower, leader is who takes the first action, follower takes the second action. Both of them can benefit, by the way. Let's try to understand the benefit of the leader. The benefit of the leader is obvious. He gets to choose the quantity first, right? If he is the dominant firm, he can quickly saturate the market so that the incumbent has so that the entrant has no opportunities. But the entrant also has advantage, right? Because almost always, when the incumbent tries to saturate the market, they sometimes overproduce. Overproduction is not good. So for the entrant, they always have a more efficient marketing strategy and production strategy. So both of them benefits from this kind of sequential move. Any question? Any question? So that's my oligopoly. Let's quickly move to the next one. I apologize, I am exhausting you guys. You took an exam today, and on top of that, I am bombarding you with materials. Materials which are not trivial by any measure. But that's how life goes. This is probably the most critical part of our chapter, of our course. So the next topic is game theory, and they're all connected in the sense that we are all looking at strategic interaction between players in our economy. In the oligopoly market, we looked at strategic interactions or interdependence between firms. Now we are going to expand that idea by looking at strategic interactions between various agents in our economy. And this entire discussion is going to be taught in the context of what we call a game theory. A game theory is basically a tool that was developed remarkably long time ago. Almost all the medieval warfare decisions used to be designed having game theoretic structure in mind. The earliest example of a game theory is probably chess, or any game where your decision is affected by the opponent's decision. That's where game theory is. So game theory is basically a structure that recognizes that that players in a market or in any economic decisions are interdependent, and they have to make decisions based on what they think the other player is going to do. That's what a game theory is. It's going to help us to formalize those behaviors and those strategies. So the word game theory has a term game in it. A game is basically has three elements. You can think of a game as a very generic structure. You're going to have players where each player will have to take some kind of economic actions. So we are trying to be very general here because we are going to apply this game theory in various different situations. A strategy is a very important part of that game as well. So you have players and these players take strategies. Strategies are basically actions taken by a firm or a player or an individual or a buyer. These are the strategies. So what is a strategy? Strategy is what you do, right? And what you do could have a wide variety of different classifications. We can think of something called dominant strategies, as was mentioned by one of you. Dominant strategies are strategies that you take regardless of what your opponent is doing. Makes sense, right? Dominated strategy is basically a losing strategy that you never do. Dominant strategy is what you always take regardless of what your opponent is doing. It has to be a winning strategy, by the way, right? Otherwise, you would be irrational to repeat the same mistake over and over again. Right? Dominated strategy is a losing strategy. And payoffs, the third element of our game, basically tell you the outcomes that you receive after you take a strategy. So it could be you getting a higher salary by working hard, or you get a larger market share, whatever. So players, strategies, and payoffs. All of these are interdependent, right? Because you cannot be a player if there is no other player in the market. So if you are, obviously there is an interdependence. Your strategies are interdependent because what you do basically depends on what your opponent is doing. And obviously the payoffs are function of that strategy. Isn't that right? So your payoffs are also interdependent then. We're going to start with talking about payoffs in a in a box diagram where we will try to show you that we can analyze the payoff or the payoff matrix, and we can use that payoff matrix analysis to understand what kind of decisions firms or players will take. Before we do that, there needs to be a little bit of further introduction with discussions about the types of games and other aspects of the game before we move on. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be playing games. Just to put it in a very simple terms. There can be various kinds of games. In terms of frequency, there can be what we call a single shot game or repeated games. Single shot game is when you play the game once. This could be like you have a duel where you get shot or you live. That's a single shot game. You're laughing, but that's true. There are a lot of single shot games. And the game could be repeated, like you play chess or you play in a price or quantity game with your opponents. Game can be based on moves. You can have what we call a simultaneous move game like the one you looked at. The Barton competition was a simultaneous move game where both of them were making decisions about price, or Kurno one where they were making decisions about quantity. It could also be a sequential move game where you move first, then I move, or I move first, you move second. So Stackelberg is a sequential move game. In all of these games, we have to have some kind of equilibrium concept. This concept is named after another Nobel laureate, John Nash. He developed this concept called Nash Equilibrium, which basically is going to be the most common form of equilibrium that we are going to look at in this game theoretic environment. So Nash Equilibrium basically is an equilibrium. It's in a game where each player takes the best possible action given the action of the other player. Do you see that it has a very strong resemblance to our reaction curve? Right? So the reaction curve was only in terms of quantity. This is very general. Anytime you have a strategy that you take in response to what your opponent is doing, that's an equilibrium. But that's not all. Anytime you take a decision in response to a decision taken by your opponent, and your opponent takes a decision as response to the decision taken by you, only then it is an equilibrium. So an equilibrium is a self-fulfilling idea. Both of your expectations have to be the same. So in many sense, equilibrium is that intersection point between the two reaction curves, if you want to think of it in a graphical way. We are going to look at game theory in a non-graphical way. We are going to look at game theory in a tabular form or just by analyzing numbers. And we are going to show that Nash equilibrium is not always the best outcome for our players. Because sometimes by engaging in this self-fulfilling prophecy thing, they end up losing. We're going to show that. There can be two types of Nash equilibrium. One is what we call a pure strategy Nash equilibrium, where you undertake one unique strategy and stick with it. Sometimes, which I will not cover, and we are running out of time very quickly, you can have something called mixed strategy Nash equilibrium, where you undertake a combination of different strategies. So you switch between multiple things, right? So you move back from one strategy to another strategy. That is very realistic in real life, by the way, and very difficult to analyze in a class environment. So I will try to do as much as possible. Okay, let's start with games. It is very important to understand the payoff matrix for our game. I will walk you through it, and I hope that you remember it. Every game will be represented by a payoff matrix where there will be two players, one player which we call the horizontal player and the other player which we call the vertical player. And the 2x2 matrix that we are seeing is going to highlight what these two players get as a result of their actions. So each of these elements show what they get when they take certain actions and their opponent takes another actions. For example, this particular cell is telling us what happens both when Warner Brothers advertise and Disney advertise at the same time, and this summarizes what happens to both of these companies, Warner Brothers and Disney, when both of them advertise. The first element is for the row player, and the second element is for the column player. They are color coded so that you don't forget which numbers refer to which player. The red numbers refer to the row player, the column number refers to the column player, the blue number refers to the column player. So this is an advertising game where Disney and Warner Brothers are trying to figure out whether they should or should not advertise. Okay, in any game, the first thing that we always try to do is figure out whether any of them have any dominant strategy. Because finding dominant strategy is easy, and if you know what the dominant strategy is, it is much easier to find the Nash equilibrium. So let's walk you through this. Okay, so when we look at these Warner Brothers, you realize that regardless of, so if Disney advertise, Warner Brothers gets 150 by advertising, which is better than not advertise. And if Disney don't advertise and Warner Brothers advertise, they get 350, which is better than not advertising when Disney is also not advertising. So it appears that Warner benefits by advertising regardless of what Disney is doing. Do you all see that? How do we know that? Because the first row dominates the second row for Warner Brothers. So Warner Brothers has a dominant strategy of advertising. Does Disney have a dominant strategy? For Warner Brothers, we compare the rows. For Disney, we are going to compare the columns. If we have a column that is better than the other column, only then we will have a dominant strategy. We see 150 better than -25. We see 350 better than 200, which means that Disney benefits by advertising regardless of what Warner Brother does. You all see that? So in this example, both Warner Brother and Disney have dominant strategy, which is to advertise and advertise. So Warner Brother would like to stay here, Disney would like to stay here. The equilibrium is going to be the situation where both of these companies advertise. Yes.
Didn't the definition of dominant strategy say that you would win regardless of what the other one does?
No, it's we say dominant strategy is what you will do regardless of what the other one does. So for you, the only dominant strategy that you will have is something that wins you. So I think you got it a little bit backward, and it's an important issue. So dominant strategy is a strategy that you do regardless of what your competitor does. Makes sense? And that dominant strategy basically results in a winning strategy for you. Make sense? Or you can think of it the other way around too, but you are winning, that's why it's a dominant strategy. Okay, simple example. The very reason why we are studying game theory today is because of this example. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the name of this example. It's called Prisoner's Dilemma. Classic case of Nash Equilibrium that does not really benefit. Okay, so let's walk you through the problem. So there are these two guys. They are criminals. They were caught by the police, and they are interrogated in two different rooms, and they are being asked to confess or not to confess. Okay? They don't know what the other person is doing. This is good cop, bad cop. It's not good cop, bad cop. This is like, separation and then creating separation anxiety. Both of them committed crime, right? And they don't know what the other person is doing, so they only have to guess what the other person is doing. So, notice that, again, remember, the blue numbers are row players, gain, the red ones are column players gain. If you look at it, you notice, so in order to find Bob's strategy, you need to compare by rows. Do you all see that? And we can see that if Bob confesses, he gets 3 years and 1 year as opposed to 10 years and 2 years. Do you all see that? He gets 3 years when the other person confesses, he gets 1 year when the other person denies. Right? Do you all see that? So, are we all clear that Bob has a dominant strategy of confessing? Bob has a dominant strategy of confessing. The other player, Art, also has a dominant strategy of confessing as well. So when both of them confesses, they end up getting 2 years and 2 years of jail time. What's the catch? The catch is that if they could collude and decided not to confess, I apologize. Both of them confess and get 3 years, right? Both of them have a dominant strategy and confess, they get 3 years and 3 years. But if both of them somehow could communicate, saying that, hey, let's deny, they cannot prosecute us if both of us denies, right? So they get lower cell sentence, right? But notice that denying is not a Nash equilibrium. Nash equilibrium tells that both of them should confess. So sometimes Nash equilibrium is not good for you. A classic example. And I'm sure you're going to have a question like that in the exam. Yeah. Because of its importance. I'm going to skip this example because I'm running out of of time. I sincerely apologize. There is a very good explanation as to how this is an extension of what we just covered. You can simply follow through that. These are all going to be uploaded in Blackboard. I will also skip this one because it talks about another example. I will also skip the mixed strategies. Mixed strategies are not important for your exam, but you should understand that anyway. The one that is important is the sequential move. Sequential moves are moves that where players move sequentially. One person moves first, the second person moves, and then probably the first person moves, and then the process goes on. In order to understand sequential move game, we can no longer look at the payoff matrix that we looked at. We have to look at a so-called tree, a game tree, to understand that. I will show you that in a minute. What is important is that since the decisions are taken on a sequential basis, so let's say in your case, the incumbent is, the entrant is moving first in a firm, and then incumbent moves. Now, can the entrant take an independent decision that, hey, I'm going to do whatever I like, without thinking about what the incumbent is going to do?
No, they're smart.
If they're smart, notice that when an entrant is trying to enter in a market, he has to think about how the incumbent is going to respond, right? So what the entrant is doing, he is moving forward by thinking backward. That's called a backward induction. You look ahead, but you reason back. You think, so the incumbent, so the entrant, when he's trying to enter, is thinking, hey, if I enter, I need to figure out what happens when I enter, how is my incumbent going to respond. If he responds very aggressively or in a way that is undesirable or unprofitable for me, should I enter? Do you see the point? He is reasoning forward and thinking backward. Let's look at this in a very simple example. Okay, so it's an example where Walmart and Kmart are in a game, in a war, where the Kmart is, so Walmart is thinking about entering or staying out, and Kmart is going to accommodate or fight. Which one is the older company? Oh, that's why I was kind of confused, right? I always thought that, so Kmart is older than Walmart, so this makes perfect sense, right? Here the entrant is Walmart and the incumbent is Kmart, right? So Walmart is thinking about, hey, should I enter in this market? Simple example, right? Excuse me. I just did a terrible thing. That is bad. Okay, so let's look at the example. So Walmart is thinking that if I enter, how would Kmart respond? And I need to figure out how Kmart responds, then I need to make a decision whether I should enter or stay out. So Walmart is looking at, thinking about what Kmart would do if they enter, right? So if they enter, Kmart has two things that they can do, accommodate and fight. Okay? The first term is for the first player, the second term is for the second player, just like we did before. So if Kmart accommodate, they get 50, if they fight, they get 0. What should Kmart do? They should accommodate. So, given that Walmart knows that Kmart is going to accommodate, should they enter or stay out? If Walmart stays out, they get 0. If they enter, they move through this and that and reach here, right? So it's a tree, do you see that? So they reach here if they enter, if they stay out, they stay here. So given that Kmart accommodates, Walmart is going to enter. That's a sequential move game. I have 5 minutes. In that 5 minutes, I want to show you at least another example. Okay, let's move to the basically game, again, a very interesting game between USA and Russia. This is about a nuclear war. Very fascinating. So Soviet is basically, Russia is basically the first mover, USA is the second mover. Russia has options, attack or status quo, which means not attack. USA has two options. Nuclear means respond to what Russia did or go to the convention. So conventional could be, I don't know, go to the international authority, try to create some kind of coalition and then fight against Russia. So whatever that conventional means. But these are the outcomes. So the first outcomes are for the first mover, second outcome is for the second mover. Second mover is USA. So Soviet, Russia is thinking about, if I attack, what should USA do? So USA can do two things. If USA follows the conventional path or engage in a nuclear war, these are the benefits of USA. -1 versus 100, -100. This appears to be less loss, so USA would go to the conventional path. And Russia knows it, right? Given that they know USA is going to follow the conventional path, what should Russia do? Russia should attack, because if they attack, they will move to this tree and they get 1. If they maintain the status quo, they gain nothing. Do we all say that? So in this game, following the backward induction, where Russia is thinking what US should do, they know that US is going to follow conventional path, so Russia should attack. We can change this argument by just slightly different, and then you will see dramatic outcomes. What if you take one option out of USA's hands, where the option is that anytime Soviets, Russia attack, there is going to be a nuclear warfare, right? So notice that this is a much simplified tree. So Russia knows that if they attack, USA is going to respond to that by forming a nuclear attack. The loss for Russia is -100 versus 0. What should Russia do? They should maintain the status quo. Okay. Any question? Does it sound interesting?
Yes.
Okay. I have actually more time, so let's do one more. This is interesting. I'm going to skip this. I want you to look at this for the next couple of minutes. So this is Apple versus Samsung, something that should be fascinating. Okay. The problem here is that Apple is threatening Samsung that if you enter, I am going to basically fight. Okay? So Samsung is thinking about entering or don't enter. So Samsung knows that if they enter, Apple is going to fight or don't fight. Notice that if Apple fights, they get 0.8. If they don't fight, they get 1. What should Apple do?
Fight. Because if they're competition into the negative, it could drive them out of business.
These are Apple's benefits.
So Apple would hurt in the short term, but it looks like Samsung would go negative and could drive them out of the market.
Okay. I'm running out of time today, but that's a very interesting point. I will post a video about that. So, what you can see that based on this situation, Apple probably will not fight. Although they are threatening that they would, it appears that they will not, because it is their interest not to fight. So this is an example where Apple is threatening to fight, but they don't. So their threat is a non-credible threat, and Samsung knows it, right? Samsung knows that if they enter, Apple basically will not fight regardless of what Apple says. So Samsung basically is now thinking about either entering or not entering. So if they enter, they know that this is where they are going to go, or if they don't enter, this is where they are going to end up. So if they don't enter, they get 0. If they and they get 0.5. So they should enter and Apple should not fight. Right? That same argument, according to a very well justified argument that was just made, can change. Can change. And I'm going to answer your question, in the class. Let's look at the same problem in a slightly different environment. This one, very simple. Okay, so what should Apple do now? Apple should fight, right? Because now, if they don't fight, they get this 0.6. If they fight, they get 0.8. So Samsung knows that if they enter, Apple will fight. They are going to get minus 0.5. So it is better for them to not enter and get 0. So I want to address your question. What's the difference between these two games? In the first game, Apple is not fighting. It is 0.8 and 1. In the second case, Apple is fighting. In the first game, Apple was not fighting. In the second game, Apple has fighting. Yeah, just let's try to see why. Why would Apple not fight in the first case?
They make more about fight.
Yeah.
Since you raised a more realistic real-life situation, so when would Apple not fight with Samsung? When they have an inventory, a very large inventory, when they know that the major problem they have is with their capacity. So if they have a large capacity, it doesn't make sense for them to fight. At least in terms of quantity, by the way. We can think about a price competition, that's a different problem. So when Apple has a large inventory, it is highly unlikely that Apple will fight, they will accommodate. As opposed to if they don't have a larger inventory. So they know that, notice that the difference between winning. So here, if they fight or don't fight, they are going to say, well, we are not going to lose that much in terms of our inventory. So think about this when you go home, and I'm running out of time. So what just happened was that there are 2 chapters. So this basically is done. I don't have any other material. This is remarkable that I was able to finish it in half an hour. This is just crazy. We have 2 chapters. When you look at the syllabus, there are 2 chapters that I was supposed to cover today. One is called a supply chain, and the other one is a discussion about auctions. I did not cover any of them. And I have a very strong belief that you should always ask questions based on what you cover. So, and I want you guys to be very, very clear about what I'm saying right now. So, in the next class, I think we don't have any exam. Our next exam, isn't that right? Our next exam is two months from, or like after 2 classes. We have 2 classes in this month. So what will happen in the next class, we'll start with the material that we were not able to cover, and then we are going to move on. This will have a very serious consequences. What will happen is that at the end we might end up dropping some of the materials from our course, and I will let you know in due time. And the reason why I want to do is because I do not want to overburden with materials that you really cannot cover, and materials that I was not able to cover. And I am not comfortable asking questions based on material that I haven't covered in the class. So please take a look at these, and thank you very much. You will get your, it will take you 3 weeks to grade this exam, and I will be starting to send replies to your exam 1 question.